Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the A segment of episode 6 of The Loud House, Sound of Silence. We begin this segment with Lincoln coming back home from school, ready to have some peace and quiet reading his comics. But throughout the first few minutes of the segment, we see Lincoln's sisters distracting him or interrupting him, and him growing progressively more irritated about it. Eventually, when he's watching TV, he comes across a commercial advertising Noise Be Gone 2000 earplugs. Believing this is exactly what he's looking for, Lincoln makes the call. Not too long after, a drone appears with the package. He says a line that I believe is a reference to a certain Futurama meme, gives the money to the drone, takes the package, and gets his earplugs. After the success of being able to read his comics in quiet, Lincoln decides that he can use the earplugs to have quiet time for other activities as well, and proceeds to do so. By the time nighttime has rolled around, Lincoln takes the earplugs out and he goes to bed. The next day, though, Lola barges into his room claiming that he promised to go take part in an event with her that's supposed to happen at 3 p.m. This promise was apparently made when Lincoln was wearing the earplugs. And Lola threatens him not to forget, because unfortunately for Lincoln, he can't for the life of him seem to figure out what this promise is. After that, we have a series of events where Lincoln gets dragged around the house to do certain activities with some of his sisters, and they tell him some horror stories about how Lola got back at them for what she perceived to be a slight against her, which can show how petty and how scary Lola can be. In the end, 3 o'clock comes around and Lola barges into Lincoln's room again, seemingly about to unleash her wrath upon him for forgetting. We then find out, though, that this whole promise for whatever happens at 3 o'clock, it was fabricated. It turns out that Lola was aware of the earplugs. We see a flashback where she finds out about it when she asks Lincoln something about her makeup, but Lincoln's answer doesn't fit the context. She then tells this to the other sisters, who apparently wondered why Lincoln didn't go along with some other favors they wanted, and they decide to get back at him by pulling this trick on him, and they justify it on the grounds of him ignoring them and saying they have to put up with it as well. It's then when Lisa shows up. She was the only sister that wasn't with the initial group when the reveal of the prank happened, and wondered why Lincoln didn't help with her experiment. Lincoln says, though, he was just told about the prank, but Lisa didn't get the memo about it being a prank. She takes the earplugs and puts them in her own ears, and then a loud explosion happens, which leaves everyone except Lisa deaf. And that's where we end the segment. Yeah, this is what I feel was another weak segment. Among the 3 segments we discussed on the channel so far that I felt were weaker segments, No Guts, No Glory, Intense Debate, and Sound of Silence, I feel this was the weakest one. As I said in my video covering Intense Debate, my thoughts about Intense Debate, I felt that segment might have started the trend of the segments where a conflict happens where multiple characters are at fault, but only Lincoln gets the blame for it. I feel Sound of Silence was what started the trend of certain segments where Lincoln gets hit with disproportionate retribution. Whether it's because he may have done something wrong, but the punishment he gets is too excessive for his misdemeanor, or if Lincoln had a perfectly reasonable request, but he still ends up being punished for it. That's what I felt was the issue for this segment in particular. I feel that Lincoln wanting some peace and quiet time to himself was not unreasonable and perfectly justified, and it definitely helps. I can relate to Lincoln in that regard. I'm someone who very much values having some quiet time to themselves, and I can understand how irritating it can be when some people keep trying to distract you or interrupt you or overall pester you when you're trying to do that and you're just not in the mood to deal with others right now. You just want your time to yourself. And that's what I felt bothered me about this segment, was how the sisters claimed Lincoln deserved to be tricked by them and accused him of ignoring his family because... No, I don't believe that wanting quiet time to yourself is the same as ignoring your family. And to give you another example of this, in real life, my older brother also is someone who values his quiet time to himself. There would be days where he had a lot of commitments and he'd have to go through quite a bit in one day for these commitments. By the time he got back home, he just didn't want to talk to anyone. He didn't really want to interact with anyone else. He just wanted time to unwind to himself. And I respected that. I didn't accuse him of ignoring me or our other relatives. I didn't plan to get back at him over it. I just understood, okay, he needs quiet time to himself. Let him have it. And if he's ready to do something with us, he'll come and tell us. And that was it. And that's what I would have liked. It would have been nice if... Well, actually, first, let's talk about the earplugs, because that's been a case where a lot of people debate over. On one hand, there are some people that thought Lincoln was in the wrong for using the earplugs, but on the other hand, some people thought it was perfectly fine to use the earplugs, and even thought that what we saw leading up to it kind of validated why Lincoln felt he had to resort to them. And that's where, no one can seem to agree on if the earplugs was a good thing or not. I mean, because whether you thought Lincoln was rude for wearing the earplugs or not, most people would still agree that the punishment he got for it was still excessive for what the supposed misdemeanor was. And that's also something I want to bring up too, is these alleged promises that the sister said he made to them the day before. As it turns out, these promises were all fabricated, not just Lola's, but all the sisters who dragged him around to do something with him throughout the house. And I feel that's also what's a strike against the segment, was that it wasn't genuine. Like, these weren't promises that Lincoln actually made when he was wearing the earplugs. It was just something his sisters made up to get back at him for wearing the earplugs. And I felt that didn't do the sisters any favors. I've said this before, I'll say it, I'll have to keep saying it until it seems certain individuals get the message, but I don't believe the sisters are personified evil, but at the same time, I do think that there is a valid point to the critiques about how the sisters can sometimes get away with questionable actions. While I wouldn't say this is necessarily the worst they've done, there are certain segments where I feel they cross the line further. I still felt this was rather questionable of them to do this. And this actually leads to the ending. Actually has its share of debates too. The fact that the Loud sisters went deaf at the end, some thought it was a reasonable punishment for them for tricking Lincoln, while others thought that it wasn't enough. Or at the very least, people thought it was fitting for the Loud sisters to go deaf, but they also felt that Lincoln going deaf as well was kind of canceled it out or kind of muddled it up a bit. And that's another debate too. Some people thought it was justified that Lincoln ended up deaf at the end too, while others thought he already was tricked by his sisters, that him going deaf at the end was rubbing salt in the wounds. And there doesn't seem to be a all-encompassing agreement among many viewers about that. But yeah, I would have much preferred if maybe they handled it a little. I felt they could have handled it better. Is like maybe you could get to the whether you thought the earplugs was right or not. I think you could have at least it could have been nice to have the sisters realize why Lincoln may have wanted to went with the earplugs, and maybe they could have found a way to respect that he wanted his quiet time as well as not as well. And this is something too that I felt they didn't really address too well. Was at the end one of the sisters claimed that they have to put up with the same thing that Lincoln does, being around a noisy house. And I felt it was a little too half-hearted because it was just them telling us this, but we never really saw any evidence of it. And I've seen some people try to justify it as it's not an unbelievable statement. And yeah, it's believable, but I don't think that it being believable justifies them not really doing more with that idea. I feel like them just having Lori say that at the end just felt kind of half-hearted, and just felt like it was just I felt it would have been a stronger point if we actually got to see some scenes dedicated to showing the sisters irritating each other too. And yeah, even if it's believable, that still would have helped the case more. Instead, it kind of just felt like, oh no, Lincoln's the bad guy because he wanted quiet time to himself. But they could have done a little more with that, the sisters putting up with a noisy house too, and that could have helped to come to a better understanding about why Lincoln used the earplugs. And I felt, yeah, that would have been much better than them tricking Lincoln and accusing him of ignoring his family when he really had a perfectly reasonable request. So, there you have it. I was not a fan of this particular segment, and we'll be covering the B segment tomorrow. Take care, and until next time.